Hello, everyone. I'm going to try to keep this short. I wanted to do a brief sort of mini lecture on writing the historiographical essay so you all get a sense of what I'm expecting for writing a historiographical essay. And hopefully, this will also help you in other classes where you will have to write a historiographical paper. So I'm not going to go over this. Just want to point out that this is something that I indicated on the syllabus on page 4. Um, okay, so I just want to briefly talk about what a historiographical essay is not. As I mentioned in the email yesterday, it's not a research paper. In a historiographical essay, you're tracing the evolution of the literature pertaining to the subject you have chosen. And so two examples of these are the Gerde and Sanchez pieces that we read on the first week of class. Okay, and again, some of this stuff that I've reiterated, it's in the email also, so I will skip over some of this stuff for the sake of time. But again, I wanted to also reiterate this other point that I found from the University of Central Florida History Department website. The professor here towards the bottom states that historiography is a different animal than the research paper. It's kind of a contradiction on how we train you. When you're going through undergrad, we train you to focus on a research paper and original research. Historiography is almost the opposite. You're not doing original research. You're looking at how others have done it. And that's from Dr. Daniel Murphy. And I like this point towards the bottom, right? Another point brought here from the University of Toronto Libraries is that unlike a research paper, a historiographical paper is not a study of a historical subject. Instead, it is an analysis of the way in which historians have interpreted that topic. So again, if you want to read these more in depth, these were in the links that I posted on the resources page. Let me go back here. But I really like this summary here from the history department at Queens College in New York. It says here, in a nutshell, historiography is the history of history, rather than subjecting actual events, such as, for example, the rape of Nanking, to a historical analysis. The subject of historiography is the history of the event. So what is the way that it's been written about? You'll also talk about the sometimes conflicting objectives that were pursued by those writing on it over time, and the way that such factors help shape our understanding of the actual event at stake and the nature of history itself. A historiographical essay thus asks you to explore several, sometimes contradictory sources on one event. And again, on the same site, it mentions the three purposes of the historiographical essay. On the one hand, for me as a reader, it allows us to get an idea of how this historical event has been interpreted from multiple perspectives, multiple historians or scholars in other fields tackling this history. For me, it also shows your mastery of those sources and over the events or over the issue itself. And also, the idea is these assignments is to develop your critical reading skills as you seek to answer why your sources disagree, and their disagreement tells you about the event or issue and the very nature of history itself. So again, I know I'm saying a mouthful here, but I'm just throwing out these ideas for those of you who are a little bit confused about different ways that you can approach this paper. And I also wanted to clarify what your historiography essay should be composed of. I know I pointed out that for some of you, that your sources were not scholarly peer-reviewed sources. So for example, when I'm talking about scholarly peer-reviewed sources, I'm talking about specifically books, like history books, such as those that we read in this class, and also academic journal articles, otherwise known as periodicals. So here, for example, I have for example, Erica Lee's article that we read was published in the Journal of American History. What will not count as your scholarly peer-reviewed sources are newspapers, magazine articles, blogs, and website pages. These are not scholarly peer-reviewed sources. If anything, they're more digital media or media sources, but they're not scholarly sources. I'm also not asking you to include primary sources because, again, this is not a research paper. So no primary sources such as government reports or statistical data. And my last point that I'm making here is that although ideally, most of your sources should be written from the perspective of historians. You can also, of course, include non-historians so long as the subject relates to history. So, for example, in this case, Alberto Varon, he's not a historian. He's in the English department, but his book covers an aspect of Chicano history, which was why it was included as part of the reading list for this course. Also, just giving some more examples, right, of what I mean by scholarly peer-reviewed sources. So for example, from the readings that we went over last week, Cohen's article was from the International Labor and Working Class History Journal, and Rudy Guevara's article was published in the Journal of Asian American Studies. And for those of you who are still not sure about where or still having trouble finding scholarly sources, as I've told some of you through email, I really recommend using the ASU Library's OneSearch. So you can directly access these journal articles based on different key terms. Sometimes you can even find books in digital format. So for example, Stranger Intimacy was a book that I was able to find, because unfortunately I lent it to somebody and I forgot who it was, and I've not seen my book again. And of course, for those of you who are close to campus can use the library, but for those of you who are looking into electronic resources, I really recommend Google Scholar, using Google Books also. There's been times when I've been able to find entire books on on Google Books. I also have talked to one of your classmates about archive.org, and I really recommend it if you're looking at older books. So for example, here I looked for immigration history, and I got, when I narrowed it down to the text section here, I got over 2,000 results, and you get sort of a variety here of different sources you can look at. But again, that's just one resource. And now, as far as how do you approach the historiography paper, I know that many of you have chosen a topic already, but maybe your thesis statement is not hashed out yet. And so what I would really recommend is leaning towards a topic that you're passionate about, as stated here by Sarika Joshi, and this is from the University of Central Florida link that I had posted. And also, I'm not going to go over this in detail, but again, another source that you can use is your annotated bibliography, to kind of remind you of why you're using each source for the paper, in case you get lost. And I wanted to talk about that there's two different approaches that you can potentially take with this paper. On the one hand, you can chronologically go in order and talk about each of the different works that you're using in the historiography paper, starting with the oldest one, and then you end, and towards the end of the paper, you talk about the work that was most recently published. So for example, some of you are using the Sanchez piece, which was written in 1999. So that, let's say if that's the oldest work that you're using in this paper, you would mention it towards the beginning. And if let's say you're using the Varon book published in 2019, that would be towards the end of your essay. And so an example of somebody who tackles that chronologically is Sanchez and his essay. But if you want to go thematical, like Jerde did, where he talked about the Turnerian school, for example, and the other school, this is also an approach that you can take. But how do we get started? So if you're still a little bit confused about what are certain things that you can highlight, you can think about things that I asked you for when you were doing the Thesis assignment, right? So in the Thesis, I had asked you, to look at things like what are their sources, what's the background of the authors, what sort of arguments do they contribute to the scholarship, what are things that you find interesting, and what do other authors say about their work, so their criticisms, including your critique as well. So again, if you don't necessarily have to cover all of these topics, right, that you were given in the Thesis when doing the historiographical essay, but here I'm just giving you an idea of different things that you can look at when you're tackling this paper. And also, and there's on this paper, I think this was from the University of Rhode Island website, where it talked about here just different ways that you can assess different types of sources. So for example, if you want to use book reviews to kind of give you an idea of what the book you chose or books that you chose said, there's also some guidelines here for potentially, assessing books. The same goes with like edited collections, which is the third bullet point here. An example of an edited collection, of course, is the Race and Immigration book that we read, and that we went over for 2 weeks. And lastly, periodicals, which again refers to academic journal articles. Okay, so again, take a look at these links if you want to get some more ideas. And also, what about your thesis statement? So your thesis statement should state how has the scholarship evolved over time. And as it says here, you will begin a historiographical essay with a thesis that presents the issue or event at stake, then introduces your sources and articulates, in brief, the author's perspective and their main points of disagreement. And so the rest here talks about how you would go about incorporating your thesis statement towards the body paragraph and conclusion. Okay, so please look at this when you get a chance. Also, another point of advice here is keep your purpose in mind. According to this historian, he says, I think the most important thing to remember for a historiography paper is the goal of the paper. Historiography is not just a recounting of the theses and chapters of a specific work. Instead, it is an analytical paper about the trends in the historical scholarship. Okay, and again, and as I've talked about in the description for the assignments, these are sort of some of the things that I'm looking for in the body paragraphs. So as the others have mentioned, so I have here underlined the different types of themes that you can highlight. And again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go over each of them. And also, this is from one of the other websites as well that I cited. Again, some other tips here is that your historiography can establish, right, who are the major thinkers in the topic you're discussing. So if you're talking about whiteness, what have some of the leading scholars that you've read, what have they said about it? What are their main arguments? And also, you can explain what are the perspectives that they're writing from. So here, for example, is it a Marxist, feminist, postmodernist perspective? We've looked at works that have talked about masculinities, for example, and gender and racialization. And here are the type of history that they have written. So is it a political, a social, cultural, or economic history? So these are definitely things that we need to think about when we are assessing our sources. And again, if you find yourself stumped, if you're having writer's block, think about working with what you have. So here it says, for example, you could use class notes, course readings, bibliographies, and etc. For the purpose of this class, I encourage you to look at what you have already written in the précis. So if you're citing one of the works that you've already written the précis about, you're more than welcome to recycle some of those statements, just fine-tune them, and make them appropriate to the essay. You can even incorporate statements that you've made already on Flipgrid, and you can even incorporate things from the annotated bibliography. And also for the conclusion paragraphs, I know that some folks have felt stumped about what do I write in the conclusion. So here what I'm saying is that, some ideas are you can give some critiques, some praises of the work. Maybe you can even talk about possible future directions for the scholarship. And again, if you're still confused about how exactly to approach this essay, I really encourage you to, revisit the Gujarati and Sanchez pieces briefly, look at how they approach their topics from a historiographical perspective. I really liked the history department website at Queens College, New York. Not only do they kind of give you an overview and a breakdown of what a historiography paper is, they even give you some examples here, right? They even have a sample thesis statement and various ways to approach this topic. So, something that I'm pointing out here that I've told some of your classmates through our Zoom meetings is through office hours. It was to take advantage of these sources, because honestly, I wish I had seen these when I was a graduate student, because in my day, almost none of my professors gave me feedback on how to approach the paper. So thank you, and hopefully this helped to clear some questions. Again, please revisit those links if you'd like to learn more about how to approach the historiography paper. Thank you.